സഭ ടി വിയിൽ ഇന്ന് നമ്മളോട് സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് വളരെ സവിശേഷമായ ഒരു വ്യക്തിത്വത്തിനുടമയായ സുഭാഷിണി അലിയാണ്. CPIMൻ്റെ പോളിറ്റ് ബ്യൂറോ മെമ്പറും കരുത്തിയായ വനിതാ നേതാവുമായ സുഭാഷിണി അലി കേരളത്തിൽ വേരുകളുള്ള ആളാണ്. കേരളത്തിലെ അവരുടെ തറവാടായ ആനക്കര വടക്കത്ത് തറവാട്ടിൽ നിന്ന് ഒരുപാട് സ്വാതന്ത്ര്യ സമര സേനാനികളും വളരെ പ്രധാനമായി വനിതാ നേതാക്കൾ നിരവധി വന്നിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കുടുംബമാണ്.
Subhashini Ali, former member of parliament of CPIM from Kanpur, daughter of Captain Lakshmi Sehgal, the awe-inspiring freedom fighter who led the fight with Subhash Chandra Bose, and president of the All India Democratic Women's Association. Subhashini Ali also represents the spirit of Kerala's progressive legacy.
Comrade, it's really happy to talk to you here.
Thank you.
You attended a very important section, the role of women in freedom struggle. That seminar organized by Kerala Legislative Assembly, the National Women Legislators Conference. And you are belong to a family, Anakara Vadakat, which has contributed a great revolutionary freedom fighters like Ammu Swaminathan, Captain Lakshmi Sehgal, Kuttimalu Amma, and all these people. So, do you think the history did justice to them?
I think that generally history does not do justice to women. I read a book once which said, "Who cooked the Last Supper?" I mean, we know all the people who participated in the Last Supper, supposedly, but who cooked the Last Supper, nobody knows. So, that is actually a very telling thing, that the women who, not only the women who fought and got some recognition and became maybe big leaders, but there were thousands and thousands of ordinary women who fought in the struggle, supported the struggle, and did all the necessary chores that are needed to keep any kind of movement alive and sustain it. And certainly those things are never remembered. I don't even remember reading about them in any serious book on the freedom struggle. Many aspects are covered, sometimes more in one book, sometimes less in one book. But while the mainstream Congress movement has got some attention in the history books, but even within that Congress-led movement, there are so many names of women who sacrificed so much that are just not there. And when it comes to the other dimensions that the freedom movement achieved after the 40s especially, then you see less and less in the history that is taught in schools about those movements and about the heroism of the women. We have these heroic women, as they say, okay, belonging to maybe slightly privileged backgrounds, educated families. Of course they did suffer, they were beaten, they were jailed, they were shot. But the fact that women coming from such terrible poverty and such great feudal oppression, like the Warli tribals, like the Telangana landless women, like the sharecroppers of Punapra, Vayalar, those are stories which I'm very happy that at least in Kerala, those stories are remembered, all those names are remembered. I mean, today while speaking, I made a terrible mistake. There was a wonderful woman called Madani, who was a singer and a poet, a young girl, Dalit girl from a poor family in the Punapra Vayalar struggle. Her brothers were leaders, and she used to sing and mobilize people. And I had received the information completely wrong that she has passed away. And I made that mistake when I was speaking. But immediately after I finished, at least 10 people came rushing up to the stage and said, no, Medani is very much alive. She's 96 years old and she's still active. But that is because in Kerala, people keep these memories alive. They cherish the memories of those who have fought for freedom, not only from British imperialism, but from Rajas like the Travancore Raja and from feudal oppression. They cherish those memories. Everywhere you go in Kerala, they know the names of the Kayur martyrs, they know the name of the people who were killed, the women who were killed in Punapra, Vayalar, They, they know all these names. Even somebody like Captain Lakshmi, she's remembered in every district in Kerala, in so many villages in Kerala. There are so many places that are named after her. So this is a very wonderful tradition in Kerala, which I hope stays alive. And I think that people get constantly inspired by those people that they are remembering and those people to whom they are paying homage year after year. I think it keeps that spirit alive. It sustains that revolutionary spirit. In other parts of the country, we don't see it in the same way. In Bengal, yes. In Bengal also, there's a tradition of remembering their martyrs, remembering their freedom fighters. And of course, during the revolutionary movement, the militant movement, there were literally hundreds of young women who came forward and joined the struggle. And then when in the 40s, when the first girls students movement, Kanak Mukherjee, Phulrenu Guha, Manikantla Sen, Kalpana Dutt, they formed the Girls Students Association, where they passed demands in their first conference, for equality and against dowry, against domestic violence and so on. And then they became the leaders of the whole movement against the Bengal famine, those interventions. And then many of them also participated in the Tibhaga movement, which was of course a movement of the sharecroppers and the poorest of the landless and the rural poor. And how many women participated in that? I mean, it's just extraordinary. So this story of women, I don't say that the privileged women and the educated women should not be remembered, but their suffering was not of the kind that these women from the poorest, most exploited families underwent. They were raped, they were brutally beaten, they were tortured, they were shot, they were just subjected to the most inhuman kind of treatment, but they stood firm. They stood firm. That Madini used to sing those songs, she is still singing and she is still inspiring people. So this is what I think needs to be told to generation after generation of Indians, women and men, that remember these people and remember what they fought for, because what they dreamt of is not the India of today. They did many things that have helped us to go forward in, say, education and in legislation and many other ways, but we certainly are not living in the India of their dreams. So we have to once again fight and be prepared to fight and sacrifice if we want that India to be realized. That's really the challenge before us. And of course, Kerala has achieved many things. Many social indicators are so much better than the rest of India. I think a great thing is that hunger, to a large extent, is not known in Kerala anymore. That's extraordinary in India, where in the hunger index, as you know, we are going down. And who are the most hungry? We say poor, but among them who are the most hungry, it's women and girl children who are the most hungry. So even the fight against hunger has not ended in India today. Forget about the fight against inequality, injustice, caste and communal oppression and so on and so forth.
So, comrade, we had great discussions on women reservation or women political participation, several things. So we have 20 states which implemented 50% women representation in local body elections. But still we are struggling to implement 33% reservation for women in the parliament.
The whole trouble is that for the local bodies, it was the members of parliament who legislated and the members of the legislative assemblies. So they were generous enough to give reservation for seats that they would not be contesting themselves. When it comes to the seats of the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabhas, assemblies, those are seats that many of those male politicians belonging to the major parties are contesting and want to contest, and that is what they are afraid of, that if those seats get reserved for women, then they will not be able to contest. So it's a really tragic situation where the two major political parties, the Congress and the BJP, who have both in principle agreed to support the legislation, have not even allowed it to be discussed in the Lok Sabha. It has not even been brought and tabled and discussed. I mean, it's just shocking, the treatment that bill has received. So this exposes a lot of hypocrisy of our patriarchal systems, and of the domination of by patriarchal thinking of the major political parties. But what was wonderful is that I'm glad this happened in Kerala, that this opportunity was given by the Kerala Legislative Assembly and the Speaker to organize this kind of a conference, and we saw such a wide participation from women across the political spectrum. I mean, there were BJP women leaders, Congress women leaders, AAP women leaders, TMC, and of course the communist parties and DMK. There may have been others also, and of course from the northeast there were some parties, but across the whole spectrum they were all for passage of the Women's Reservation Bill, even though their own parties may be opposing it. So this is a very wonderful sense that if women become more assertive, and there were women from JDU from Bihar also, if women become more assertive, then there may be a situation in which they will be more concerned about women's rights and less concerned about political dictation of their male leaders, and they will fight for this kind of legislation, and also against the kind of shaming of women that is done so often by politicians, male politicians, and against women who are in public life. So these were important things that were discussed.
Recently there is a gender insensitive and derogatory comment against Maharashtra MP Supriya Sule had faced from one another political leader. So still we are struggling with this kind of mentality in our politics and society.
Still means we are, this is the reality, that if women in public life, it means important powerful women can be spoken about in this manner, then what about the rest of women at different levels of society? What is the kind of abuse that they are facing? We saw what was happening with Muslim women who were being auctioned online, and there were some very prominent Muslim women who are journalists and celebrities. So what does that mean? That this is the filth and the scum that is rising every day to the surface, and it's not being controlled, it is not being addressed. Now recently in Kerala, a gentleman was arrested for a hate speech against minority communities, and many people are saying it should have been done. But what about people in other parts of India who have made the most atrocious hate speeches against minorities and against women belonging to minority communities, against Dalits, but no action is being taken against them? Ruling parties at the center and in many of the states are completely ignoring this. So then what does that tell us about the regressive ideology that is gaining strength, which is patriarchal, which is casteist, which is sexist, which is communal, but certainly it is gaining strength. We cannot help but face this fact, and this has to be addressed by women across the political spectrum also.
Can you briefly tell about your Malayali family roots?
Well, today was a very proud day for me because in the inaugural session, the President of India and the Chief Minister of our state, Kerala, and the Speaker of the Assembly, they all mentioned my mother and my grandmother. That was a very proud moment, and it's a privilege, of course, to belong to a family like this, and household, that Tarawad, has been a Tarawad of very strong women. I mean, for one thing, we didn't have any practice of sambandham in that house, at least for the last 5-6 generations. There's no known case of sambandham. And the women all continued to live there and actually manage the house and the fields and everything. They were not dependent on their brothers, as was the case, unfortunately, in many, many Nair households. It was the brothers who not only controlled everything and the property, but they also controlled the lives of their sisters, and they are the ones who encouraged sambandham and various other awful practices. But at least I know that from my great-grandmother's time and her mother before that, all the women, matriarchs of Anakara Vadakar, they were very strong and they controlled things. And my own great-grandmother, I remember, and she was also strong lady. She, during 1921, was staying there, and of course it's part of Malabar, just near where the whole Mapla revolt was taking place. And there's a story that she was thinking of leaving and going to Madras, but there was some Mapla gentlemen who worked there, and they came and said, no, please don't leave, and they said, we will protect you. And so there was this, imagine, that was a place, of course there was no electricity, it was the middle of forest, and there's this Nair woman living alone with two Mapla men sleeping outside her room to protect her. It's incredible. And she was not bothered about what people would say. She was happy that they were ready to protect her. And after that, the story is that all the Maplas in that area, they had a meeting in the mosque and they wrote a letter and sent it to Nilambur and said, please don't cross the Bharatapura river and come here because we are very peaceful here. And they didn't, that happened, nobody came this side. So from that you can imagine that she was a strong woman. My grandmother Ammu Swaminathan was very young when she got married, but anyway there are many stories about that marriage, I won't take up your time, but she became very involved in the freedom movement as a young mother and in Madras, and her husband died when she was only 30, but he was also very progressive, so she continued being active when she was an MLA, and then she was a member of the Constituent Assembly, and she went to jail, and then she became Lok Sabha MP and Rajya Sabha MP. And what is more important for me is that she was a great supporter of Dr. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly. She was a member of the Select Committee on the Hindu Code Bill, and she made a very important speech supporting him and condemning those people who were opposing the reforms that he was trying to present before that. So she was always a great fighter for women's rights, for family planning, against dowry, against so many of the social, I would say criminal practices. And she remained a fighter for all these things all her life. And then my mother, who grew up in Madras, Lakshmi, she was a doctor, and she left Madras and went to Singapore. She didn't want to work for the British government as a doctor. And over there she was practicing medicine, treating the poor people, migrants and all that. And then she was there at the airstrip when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose landed, and he knew her mother, and so he was happy to meet her. And after 2 days he was talking about this women's regiment that he wanted to start, and they everybody said it's impossible, it can't happen. So he said, you call that lady doctor. So my mother went, and he said to her, and she immediately agreed and said, I'm ready to join, I'm ready to work. So he said, what about your practice? She said, I'm locking up my clinic tonight. So she went and locked up her clinic, and she cut her hair. She felt that as a soldier she would not be able to look after this long hair. So she cut her hair and reported for duty the next day. And then of course they got involved in the recruitment, and that was so inspiring that these young girls from poor families, very lower middle class families from all over Southeast Asia, of Tamil and Kerala origin, they are the ones who volunteered. They were not from the so-called martial races, and they volunteered. They had never seen India. Their great-grandparents had come as migrants because they felt inspired by the fight for Indian freedom. And so they joined, leaving their homes, leaving their husbands. They were trained, they were ready to die for the independence of India, but independent India didn't do much for them, I must say. Many of them couldn't even come back to India, and very many of them, nobody knew what happened to them. So that was Captain Lakshmi, who's remained in the service of people all her life. She was very active, for example, in the 84 riots. She stood in front of her clinic where a lot of Sardars lived with a chappal in her hand, and she said, if anybody comes, she was quite amazing, fearless woman. And she remained a doctor of the poor, and then, she contested for president. She became one of the founders of IDWA. She joined the CPIM. So she continued till her last day to serve people and to fight for, people's rights, women's rights and people's rights. Kutimalu Amma, I mean, though she was in the Congress side, but she was also quite a fighter in her own way. she's left her mark in Kerala politics, certainly. She's very well known and respected. Then another cousin of my mother's, P. Sushila, she was also a freedom fighter who continued to live in Vadakat till she died last year. And she was very devout Hindu but very anti-RSS. And in fact, she went to the temple when RSS tried to have a shakha there, and she said, I will come with my own lathi and drive you away from here. So these are good, wonderful, inspiring traditions, and we hope that we can live up to them.
Thank you so much, Comrade Subhashini Ali, to talking to us. It is a wonderful time.
And this was a wonderful initiative by the Speaker and the Kerala Assembly, and it should be held, of course, everywhere. But the fact that this initiative was taken in Kerala, I think has inspired all the women who have come here. They were all talking about the atmosphere in Kerala, about what the Speaker has done, this opportunity that they were given. They're all really, really excited by this, and I think they're going back to their states. I hope they will all fight for similar, similar events to be held elsewhere also.
Yes, of course. Let us hope for that.
Yeah.
And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your.
Thank you.